Welcome to another episode of CHAX Chat. Join Chad Chilius and me, Dax Castro, where each week we wax poetic about document accessibility topics, tips, and the struggle of remediation and compliance. So sit back, grab your favorite mug of whatever, and let's get started.
Welcome, everyone. Today's podcast is sponsored by Taman Incorporated, a full-service accessibility and technology practice. Taman partners with organizations of all sizes to shift mindsets and empower people. Wherever you are in your inclusive journey, Taman's team can help you with web accessibility assessments and accessible digital solutions. Taman believes access to information is a human right. So head on over to tamaninc.com and get more information. My name is Chad Chilius. I'm an Adobe certified instructor as well as director of training solutions and principal at CHAX Training and Consulting.
And my name is Dax Castro. I am director of media productions here at CHAX Training Consulting. And Chad and I are both certified as accessible document specialist by the International Association of Accessibility Professionals. And if you'd like your certification, head over to accessibilityassociation.org/certification and find out more about getting your certification. Matter of fact, Chad, we just had another one of our followers, Andrew Skinner.
Yeah.
Get his ADS, and that's kudos to him, man. Yeah,
absolutely. Congrats, Andrew. I think we should do that, Dax, like on our podcast, give a shout out to anybody who passed their ADS that week.
I agree.
I think it's a great idea.
We'll make it.
And Andrew was very gracious. I mean, he gave a shout out to us and kind of thanked us for sharing the knowledge and helping him on his journey. So that made us feel really good, right?
Well, I will tell you, his time zone and my time zone. So it's 1 a.m. usually when Andrew messages me. So he'll find me on LinkedIn. He'll be like, hey, and then he'll send me some long message and we'll go back and forth for like an hour. And then I'm ready for bed. So yes, but always happy to answer questions. My ADHD will not let me go to sleep without, coming to some kind of conclusion. Otherwise, I'll just sit and think about it for an hour long while I'm laying there in bed. So.
I, by the way, am not up at 1 a.m. If you message me at 1 a.m, you will get dead silence.
Oh, that's funny. I know. I do know that. You will get a message in the morning when you're ready to go, which is what I expect anyway.
Yeah, man.
So today, Chad, we're going to talk about a really cool topic. I think that really is kind of on the tips of our tongues, which is 7 things that fail accessibility but will pass your checker. Our new booth, we were just at CSUN, and our new booth has a big headline on it that says, automation does not guarantee compliance, which means, passing something through a checker doesn't mean that it's going to actually be a good user experience. So we're going to talk today about a few things that you should be thinking about looking at in your document, because the checker will completely pass every one of the things that we're about to talk about, right?
Yeah. And I mean, this idea came from a gentleman reached out to me and wanted me to review 23 documents that he had remediated. And he wanted me to review them and confirm that they were accessible. And every one of them passed the PAC Checker. Every one of them was technically PDF UA and WCAG compliant. However, I found a bunch of errors, and we're going to talk about them today.
Yeah, awesome. And I'm working on a set of 500 documents for a major client that I can't say who. But some of these barriers exist in there too. And so we went through and made sure that we fixed all of those. And, we're going to talk about some of the things we found. So the first one, Chad, go ahead.
Yeah. P tags. Right. And so I know, our listeners are saying, well, what's wrong with P tags? And the answer is nothing. Nothing is wrong with P tags as long as that content is simply a paragraph. Right. But if the content is really a heading or a bulleted list,
which we see all the time, right?
Which we see all the time, then that violates what, Dax?
Info and relationships, 1.3.1, info and relationships, which basically says if it's a thing, tag it as the thing that it is, right? And headings, the reason why headings and lists are the things that are most important, because there are other things something could be tagged as. And if it were tagged as a paragraph, not the end of the world. But headings are the major anchor structure as someone moves through the document to be able to organize the content, rather than just reading it like a romance novel where you're just reading from top to bottom. You need that structural chapter or subset of information to be able to understand the whole content. And lists, right, Chad? Lists are the other important part, because they do what?
Well, when you read a list using assistive technology, when AT gets to that item, it announces list with X number of items, right? So it'll say list with 5 items, and that's really helpful, right? Because, I always say, like, as a sighted user, when we see a numbered list or a bulleted list, we immediately know it's a list, right? Like, we see it, we recognize it, we're like, oh, this is a list of items. But if it's voiced as a regular paragraph, the user never knows that they're reading a list of items. And again, that violates info and relationships.
Well, what's interesting is they may know, because they're going to hear bullet and then an item, bullet and then an item. But if I had a list of 500 items, how do I know when I'm at the end of the list? One of the nice key features of a list being tagged as a list is that it announces list 500 items. And I know if I'm me and everybody else, no one wants to listen to 500 items in a list, right? So that allows me, as I'm scanning visually through a page, you see an entire page full of list items. You're not going to probably not going to physically read every single one of those list items. You'll skim through it, or you might search for something. You want to give that same experience to someone using a screen reader. If I know there are 500 items for this list, I'm probably not going to sit down there or listen to the entire 500 names. So, yeah.
No, I think I've said this on the podcast before. I have one client who, at the back of their document, they list all the zip codes that they service.
Right.
And it's like 300 zip codes, right?
Sure.
And they don't have it formatted as a list, but I basically make it a bulleted list, but I hide the bullet,
Sure.
basically, so that when they come upon that, it'll say list with 300 items, And one thing I will add to that, just to give a little bit of general design guidance for people, it is super helpful if you have a heading that follows that list. Right.
I was waiting for a pause in your thought to bring that exact point up, because I would have done it by county or by region or by whatever to group those items, right?
Yeah. That would have been super helpful too. If you group the zip codes by county or whatever, because then you could say, oh, I need to go to, my county is Berks County, right? So, you go there and then you can read what's there. But if you do encounter a list of 300 items and you're like, I don't want to listen to 300 items, pressing the H key will take you to the next heading that follows the list. Well,
the hard part about that is knowing the structure is important, because if the next item after that list is a heading, then you move to a logical spot. But what if the next item is a paragraph after the heading, after the list, and now you've skipped a whole piece of content? This is why our class, Designing with Accessibility in Mind, is so key, because it makes you think about those things and going, wait a minute, how I design the structure of my document helps people understand how to navigate through it and potentially keep them from missing items. So
100%.
Awesome. Well, the next one here is layout tables, and we see these all the time, right? We've talked about this on a previous podcast. Can a form be inside a table? Absolutely. As long as you use a regular, predictable structure, first, label in the first column and form field in the second column or something similar. Go listen to that podcast if you want to learn more about that. But other things, earlier today, I was working on a document where the user had made 4 columns in a table, and there was a bold heading in each one of the columns. Let's just say north, south, east, and west. And then underneath that, in each column, it was a list of 6 items, and they had checkboxes next to them. So the user said, hey, the read order for this table isn't correct. it's going left to right and I wanted to go top down. And I'm like, well, you can't. That's not how a table works.
Yeah.
A user can navigate that way, but if they don't know to, then they really don't, it takes some exploration, but I'm sure you can figure it out. I said the better way to do this would have been headings and a list. So in essence, what we had was a layout table, a table that was used just instead of a 4-column paragraph set or block of text, it was 4 columns in a table. So that's going to pass a checker every time if you set your headings correctly and do the stuff you need. But the user experience is not going to be what you intend.
Right. Yeah. Right. Like whenever I get tables and like individual cells are filled with a ton of content, it's not a great experience. It's just not a great experience for the user. So, and again, that kind of comes down to designing with accessibility in mind. Like, what do you want the user experience to be? And knowing how tables are read helps you to make a wise decision regarding how to do that.
Well, the other that rolls right into our next point, which is use of color, right? Many times we see those tables full of color in cells, right? And so we know that that's not accessible either. So if you have a table that uses red, green, and yellow for status or, priority, that's not going to be read by assistive technology. And that's where, we talk about that in one of our other podcasts, you can use a series of text, hidden text. We prefer the visible text because it's more of it benefits everyone. But there are, symbols or something else besides color as the only means of communicating information. The other one we see, Chad, is colored headings that symbolize some, all the red headings are environmental concerns and all the blue headings are, air pollution concerns, things like that. Now, one could argue that if the title was descriptive enough, you might not need to know the color or have that association. But oftentimes, if we just say impact is the word for the heading, but you have a blue impact and a green impact and a red impact, they're all impact, then the color does become important. And, we could fix that with actual text, right? Chad, you could include that. How would you do that?
Well, I mean, there's a number of ways to do that. I mean, actual text is effectively a replacement for the item in which you're applying the actual text. So, like you could, if your text does not accurately describe something, you could add actual text, and that actual text replaces whatever the actual. I kind of said it.
Whatever the physical text is, right?
Yeah, the actual text replaces the physical text in the document, but it applies to figures too, or this was another good one, images of text. Right. That's another situation. Like that image has no value to the user until you add additional information. So
because graphic
text is Yeah.
The word graphic doesn't mean anything. They're going to hear graphic and you're like, okay, graphic of what? And you're going to say, so instead of hearing graphic, if it was all your chapter headings had drop shadow and some fancy thing you did in Photoshop and it said chapter 1 overview and it was an image, you really don't need to tell the user graphic chapter 1 overview. You just need to say chapter 1 overview. And so you use that actual text property instead of alt text to bypass the word graphic, and it will just say whatever you say. And in the case of the colored text, you could say environmental concern, impact, right? You added the extra words to overcome the color coding that you and I would see as a regular, as a person with sight. So use of color.
Yeah. And I know we're segueing a little bit, but like, as we're on the topic of actual text, I recently had a client who, when you do footnotes and endnotes, mainly footnotes, right? The way that most programs structure it'll tag the reference and then it'll read the note immediately after the reference.
Right.
But the fact that it's a reference and a note, I don't think is voiced by assistive technology.
It's not. Yeah.
And so you and I have talked in the past about the fact that if you ever put a footnote reference after a number, like the year 2024, and then you have a reference 1, it's voiced as 20,241.
Right.
Right.
Because it can't differentiate between the number and the footnote. The superscript doesn't mean anything in assistive technology.
So what my client did is they added actual text to the footnote reference.
Yep.
That voiced it as footnote 1 and then described the footnote, and it was a legitimate solution to the problem. I thought it was a creative solution. And I think I pinged you about it. I was like, hey man, do you see any problems with doing this? And we talked about it and we're like, no, that's perfectly
It's kind of
fine.
my go-to method when I want that Cadillac experience. When I'm really trying to be descriptive, then I'm going to do that. So, all right. So moving on, content order, right? Chad, I'll test you. Do you know the WCAG principle that applies to content order? It's meaningful sequence, but
that's
what's
right.
the number?
That's right.
But
Meaningful
what's the number?
Sequence. 1.4.1.
1.3.2. So 1.3.1 is info and relationships. 1.3.2 is meaningful sequence, right? So, and guys, we talk about all these numbers, just so you know, there's about 5 or 6. And you know what we should do, Chad? We should do a podcast on this. The 5 principles you should have memorized as a number, remembering the number and the title so that you can just spout them off wherever. But info and relationships, use of color, meaningful sequence, reflow, or which is robust, right? And then there's a few others we can talk about in the podcast. I don't want to spoil it all, but yeah, that'd be a good one.
Yeah, like those are the WCAG principles that you and I live and die by, right? Like I don't have them all memorized. I don't want to have them all memorized.
Well, Chad, we just got this new card, right? I mean, mine has a little bit of a coffee stain on it here. That's why it's on my desk. But this card is our new handout, which is WCAG in plain English. So, I can see 1.1 as text alternatives, or 1.1.1. We just talked about this non-text content and writing alt text. So great thing to have. You can download our WCAG in plain English on our website under the downloads. So that's accessibilityunravel.com. And then just click the downloads and you should see the WCAG in plain English. If not, reach out to us on LinkedIn and we'll send
get you a
one,
copy.
Right? Yeah. So content order basically is that if the reading order matters, right, then make it be in the right reading order. There's lots of times where things can be read in a bunch of different ways, and in that sequence, it doesn't really change the meaning of the content. It's just do I want to go left or do I want to go right? But there are times where it does matter, and moving from left to right versus top to bottom does change the meaning of the content and create a bad user experience. So when that matters, make sure that your tags are in sequence. And in InDesign, that means anchoring things correctly, because we know that when you don't anchor objects correctly, they get dumped to the end of a document most often. If you're using the threaded, threading your text boxes and not using the articles panel, they get dumped into the end of the document. And I was working on a document just 2 days ago where like 6 of the graphics, they were full page maps. All of them were just dumped in the end because they just didn't get anchored in the right way. So.
Yeah. I mean, I would add to that. I mean, either anchor them or break your content up into logical chunks so that you can do it all in the articles panel. Either way,
Agreed.
I mean, I don't care which way you go, but both of the methods work. But meaningful sequence is subjective. You know what I mean? Like, it's not always easy to look at every page and be like, oh, this is the logical sequence, because sometimes you'll make some concessions and be like, you know what? Let's just read this sidebar at the end of the page, right? Sure. Unless it's connected to a particular point on the page. But that's where there's like, maybe subjective is not the right word. Maybe it's just more like you have to give it some thought, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
What do you want the user experience to be? I mean, I literally want to get that tattooed on my arm, Chad, and just be like, yep, every time. Maybe right here. I can do that right in that empty spot. What do I
You're
want
running
the
out of
user
room, man.
experience to be?
You're running out of space for it.
I'm getting, I got all this space underneath here. No one wants to see that though. All right. Insufficient alt text. So This kind of goes hand in hand with another one, which is decorative items are tagged with alt text. So on one hand, I had literally a line graph just an hour ago that said line graph showing, percentage of growth over time. Okay, what does that really mean? Does it mean a good thing or a bad thing? Having quantitative descriptions inside your alt text is really important.
Yeah, I didn't really walk away from anything with that, right? You know what I mean? It's like, okay, cool, but I'm not any smarter now having read that, right? So yeah, that's a big challenge, right? I mean, and we run into that mostly with your charts and graphs where you're trying to show a trend over time, but even like for other elements, photographs or whatever, like one of the documents I was working on earlier. How did they describe it? They said, I think they said like, so it's 5 people standing, in a photo, and they described it as 5 characters, in a room, blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, 5 characters. That's an interesting way of describing that. You know what I mean?
Immediately I think of Chinese characters all,
or cartoon characters, right? Yeah.
And then the other one, Chad, is decorative items being tagged with alt text, right?
Yep. So, you and I say this all the time, right? Like the first question you should ask yourself when you come upon an image is, does it have any value, right? And that will guide you as to what your next step is going to be. If the answer is no, it has no value, artifact it. If it does have value, now you got to take a couple other steps to decide, okay, how do I want to describe it? Right.
Sure.
And I think it's a really good question to ask because in one of the documents I was working on, they had these like little icons that they were using to represent something, but the heading said the same thing.
Right.
So why are we describing, and Dax at CSUN, we were talking about this a little bit earlier, in my session, bridging the gap between Word and PDF. One of the attendees who sat in on my session was blind. And in the middle of my talk, she said, "Thank you for artifacting figures that have no value. Thank you for not making me read useless figures in a document when they have no value." And that meant a lot to me. You know what I mean? That I was like, thank you. I appreciate that.
Well, for me, the question I always ask is, if this image were not here, would the user be losing something?
Yeah.
If this image were not here, is it taking away information? So we kind of look at it from coming at it from different sides of the candle here. Does it have any value, or if it wasn't here, would they lose something? I think either question is a good one.
Yeah.
So, So, and then finally, our last one is irregular tables. And we've spent so much time, and we will continue to spend lots of time talking about tables, but you can have merge cells that go all the way across an entire table. And if you tag it as a column header, which is typically what we see, because it's dividing the section, top section, middle section, bottom section, it's going to tag just fine. And you have cells that have an appropriate heading structure, and everything's going to be great until the end user tries to listen to it, and they're going to hear 6 different headings all stacked on top of each other when they get to the bottom of the table. Because remember, headings, when they are in a table, column headers, when they are in a table, the table doesn't know when to stop reading one and start reading the next one. It's just going to stack them all on top of each other. So you're going to hear north, south, east, west, and then whatever your value is, instead of just hearing west and then your value. So, and that's just one example of an irregular table that would pass, and there's plenty more. So.
Yep. There's tons of examples, but I mean, in the one that you just gave, Dax, I mean, it would be really cool if you could kind of define specificity of table headers. Do you know what I mean? Like the assistive technology would honor the most immediate heading to the data tables.
Oh my gosh, I just thought of this, Chad. Row count. So in the property for that cell, we have scope, which is column or row. We have row span or column span for how many cells does that heading cell take up or equal. But what if we had another value there that said how many children, and it would go by row. So if you're a column header and you gave it a child set, I don't know what you'd call the label, but let's just say child set, and then you set it to 6, it would know that the next 6 rows are only applied to it. And then you could do the same thing for the next one. That would be epic to be able to do that.
And that's what I meant by specificity, right? You could control that, right now, the only way to really do it is with header cell IDs. And we kind of rely on third-party tools to help us do that, because doing it manually is insanity. But yeah, I mean,
well, we found out that CommonLook can do that. So it was interesting. I always thought that AxesPDF was the only one that kind of had the ability to quickly set cell IDs, and in all fairness, AxesPDF still is the quickest and best way to do complex tables using cell IDs. In our PDF Accessibility Facebook group, there's a video of me walking through a really complex table that would take probably 30 or 45 minutes to do manually, that I do in about 5 seconds. But I did discover that in CommonLook, you can set cell IDs, and they basically have kind of a split screen thing, and they say select your headings in the top screen and then select the data cells in the bottom screen, and then you say assign, and then it will assign them. It's there. I would use it if I had CommonLook open and I was doing something else. But if I were starting from 0, I probably would open AxesPDF and use that. But the tool's available. It is there to use. Doing it manually is the worst. I wouldn't wish that on my worst enemy. So.
No. Doing it in Acrobat is pain and suffering. That's all I got to say about that. And Dax, I think you and I have both suffered.
I have had my lashes, let me tell you, nights and weekends. I can't tell you how many times. So, Yeah. Well, awesome. Well, we hope that you've learned something today. These are the 7 things that fail accessibility but will pass your checker. Just remember that passing a checker is a great first step. We talk about passing Acrobat as our first step, walking the tags tree, looking at all of the things that we talked about, plus meaningful sequence and all of the other use of color and contrast and all of that, then running it through the PAC Checker as your final step. And then obviously the very final step is testing it with a screen reader, because we know that checkers are mechanical and they're just looking for pass-fail criteria. And we as humans make mistakes. So one of the best ways to know it's a good user experience is to get in there with NVDA or JAWS and test that document. So
and I mean, honestly, the best checker is you.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
And informed you, right?
And informed you. Yeah.
So many, we had our document testing with NVDA class a little bit ago, and man, boy, it's a struggle sometimes when you're just starting out. And matter of fact, at CSUN for our pre-conference lab, someone came up to me and said, I was taking this pre-conference lab because I thought that I would just learn how to do all this stuff. And she goes, it's great. I learned a lot of information. Got to go back with a wealth of new skills. But I will tell you, what I've realized is I am not the person to do this. And I can understand that, because it's drinking water through a fire hose. And why IAAP requires that you've been doing it for at least a year before you take the ADS is because it takes some time to get your feet wet and understand really what's going on.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Well, great session today, Chad. This is a good podcast. So hopefully our listeners, and if you're seeing this or hearing this somewhere and there's ability to make a comment. Tell us what you liked. Which one was your favorite? Give us a shout out. It helps promote the podcast. We get about 1,500 downloads per month. It fluctuates a little bit above and below that, but I'd love to see that double by the end of this year. And you can help by doing that. Help by adding comments and sharing this with people you know. So
we want to know what you think. And oftentimes we get the material for our podcast from you, right? I mean, whether it's on the PDF Accessibility Facebook group, or it's an email we got from somebody, or a comment, on the podcast, sometimes somebody will mention something and we're like, oh, that's a great thing to talk about, on the podcast. So keep it coming. We love hearing from you guys. Well, I want to thank everybody for joining us today. Once again, Tamin is the sponsor of our podcast. As a reminder, Tammin is a full-service accessibility and technology practice that partners with organizations of all sizes to shift mindsets and empower people. So wherever you are on your inclusive journey, Tammin's team can help you with web accessibility assessments and accessible digital solutions. So head on over to tammininc.com. My name is Chad Chilius.
And my name is Dax Castro, where each week we unravel accessibility for you.
Thanks, guys.